I am now, so Miss Heller, you guys might notice, just walked by Miss Heller. She was my 9th grade teacher at Amador back in 2001. So 2001 was when I was in 9th grade at Amador, and she was my teacher. So she doesn't recognize me, which is not that surprising. It's been a decade or so. And life has changed a lot. Like, if you notice over the past, history didn't change that quickly through most of mankind's time on Earth, right? So from like the 1505 was not that different than 1555. It was different. It wasn't nearly as different as 2001 is to 2012. And just even the way phones are used in school, I'm telling you, I'm almost like mind blown coming to school and seeing just the way things work out. But the change that I want to talk about for a moment this week is the level of involvement that you can see Muslims taking in American politics. Because whenever any community grows within whenever a minority group grows within any majority country that they're different from, when they initially get there, they don't yet feel comfortable taking on a leadership role. They don't yet feel comfortable kind of holding up their signs and saying, yes, we're Muslims and we're here to operate within your system and this and that. And so if you guys actually, I don't know if you guys know this, but back when I was in high school, back in like 2001, right before 9/11, Muslims in this area particularly were predominantly Republican, which might surprise you guys. Like back in the 2000 election, Muslims were mostly voting for Bush. Almost all Muslims really, particularly in this area, voted for George W. Bush. And so as you can tell, there's been quite a change from when a lot of Muslims helped vote in Bush to Muslims cheering on him getting a shoe thrown at him, right? So things changed quite quickly in that regard. And now, I think it's safe to say that since the Iraq War, particularly, the Muslim vote has shifted quite strongly towards the Democratic, the Democrat candidate. And so I'm not here to talk about who to vote for, what to vote for, or Mitt Romney and Barack Obama. I'm talking about the fact that it's clear to me that you guys are becoming more politically involved than my generation was back, 10 years ago or so. And a question for you guys to all ask yourselves is, as the Muslim community becomes a more well-settled community, right? Because what you guys have to note also is that even just 10 years ago, the sense in which Muslims felt at home in America was not the same. And so I noticed this generation has a much more, and I'm not saying this is good or bad, it just happens to be that you guys have much more ease with calling yourself American in a very full way than even than even like my generation did 10 years ago. And so as any minority group tends to take on a wider role, and they start having high school groups, then they start coalescing around different candidates. For example, you guys might remember Jerry, I think his name is McNerney, right? Like a couple years back, a lot of his vote was because of the fact that he got Muslims in the area to all coalesce around him. I forget how good high school vocabulary is. You guys know what coalesce means? No? Okay. To form in a group around something. Okay? And so that's only going to increase with time, right? So the question becomes for you guys, what is going to be the Muslim platform? You guys know the word platform, right? Whenever a candidate gets up there, he has a platform. This is my agenda. So what is going to be the Muslim agenda as we mature? So as you've seen a lot of minority groups, they take on agendas, right? So you take the African American community, it's not a surprise that, for example, part of their agenda becomes affirmative action, right? You take the Jewish community, a lot of their agenda becomes, military support for Israel. So what is going to be the Muslim agenda as we go forward? And so what often the Muslim philosophy, what it asks you to do is it says, okay, what were the principles that you can take from the earliest Islamic politicians? So the question I ask you guys is, who are the earliest Islamic politicians? Who was the first?
Adam, the Prophet.
The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? And who was the second?
Abu Bakr.
Abu Bakr. Who was the third? Hazrat Omar, and then Hazrat Usman, and then Hazrat Ali, right? And so those are the four, called they're called the rightly guided Khalifas. Then the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is and I'm trying to emphasize to you guys for a moment that he was, Muhammad ﷺ, a politician. And this is different, for example, than previous traditions, right? So we know from the Quran that Allah did send other prophets, for example, right, Jesus. And Jesus is right now in this country a symbol of political, you could say, organization, correct? So Jesus, for a lot of people, stands for something. For somehow, some way, Jesus has come to stand for gun ownership rights and no taxes for the rich. It's one of the strangest historical developments, perhaps in the history of politics. Because if you read the stories of Jesus, he was a man who was so kind of unconcerned with the world that they say he owned three things: a cup with which he drank from, a comb with which he combed his hair, and a rock with which he slept on. And then he found someone sleeping with his hand, so he threw away the rock. He found someone drinking with his hand, so he threw away the cup. And he found someone combing with his hand, so he threw away the comb. And that's, Allahu Alam as to exactly how accurate that is in absolute detail. But the point that it's getting at is that Jesus, peace be upon him, really did not care about this world. He was not concerned with that. His name was Ruh Allah. What does that mean? The Spirit of God, right? Which means that he was really not built for living on this earth, and hence he only was a prophet for 3 years. He was a prophet for 3 years. During his time in the country of Israel, they weren't actually under independent rule. They were ruled by Rome. And it's interesting to note that he never really spoke against the Roman rulers. And in fact, the religious elements who wanted him killed, they made up a lie to the Roman emperor and they said that he's speaking against the Roman Empire, and that's how they got him killed. But he wasn't even dealing with that. The reason I went through all this history of Jesus is to say that the reason that the Christian right political message is so kind of odd is because Jesus, peace be upon him, was not meant to be a politician. His words, his teachings were not...
Oh, 5 minutes. That's...
Oh, really? Sorry. Crap. His words were not meant to transition into American politics, but they tried to, and hence you have this kind of absurdist, Jesus is guns and rich people thing, right? Which makes no sense if you read the Gospels. Now you look at our history, however, we do have a very clear, and that's not to denigrate that he was sent for a particular reason. Now Muhammad ﷺ came with a much more political bent. And my message to you guys in the short 5 minutes I have left is that the Islamic political thought has one thing underlying it very, very strongly, and that is care and attachment to the impoverished. And so if you think about it, what are the 5 pillars of Islam? And I don't know if you guys, but it's the Shahada, prayer, fasting, Zakat, and Hajj. Which one of these, are any of these political in nature? Only one, the 4th one, Zakat, right? Only one is political in nature, and that is give of your wealth to the poor. So that there's something to be learned from that. And just an interesting political note, right now, right, if you guys watch the debates and say it involved, you guys know that people are wondering how can we get the higher income element of society to pay more taxes here. And they say, wait a second, we pay a lot of taxes. And how are they correct in this assessment? They are correct in that as far as income tax goes, they do pay a higher rate in this country than other people. However, what Islam understood about wealth is that wealth is not simply income. Income means what you earn in a year as it flows to you. Wealth includes what you just possess. And that is what is called capital gains tax here, right? You guys have heard this phrase, capital gains tax? Have you guys not heard this phrase? Right, it refers to the fact that when your asset, your wealth, your good appreciates in wealth, then you pay a tax on it. Now, in Islamic, in Zakat, it's 2.5%, not on income, it's 2.5% on wealth. So these early Islamic thought understood this idea that the wealthy element of society doesn't earn their income through like roti rozi, what am I thinking here? help me out here, daily bread type of,
Toil.
I understand.
yeah, okay. And so, now the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, right? He was, I want to juxtapose for a moment George W. Bush to the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and that's it's an absurd comparison, but just to make the point. And George W. Bush is not alone in this, right? George W. Bush, he once was in front of me. It's in the film called Fahrenheit 9/11. They show him standing in front of a big audience of wealthy donors, right? And basically at a country club, and he says to them, "People call you the elite. I call you my base." Right? And then they all started laughing, ha 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 ha, right? And then this type of, nice cocky laugh that they have. And so what do you notice there? You notice that his political bent is loyalty to the wealthy of society. What did Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam say? And I say again, Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, not only our prophet, but our first political leader. His dua, his prayer to God was, "Oh God, keep me poor in this lifetime. Let me die with the poor, and then resurrect me with the poor as well." Our first political leader, his dua, his common dua was, "Oh God, let me live with the poor, die with the poor, and be resurrected with the poor." That's who our political leaders are. Hazrat Abu Bakr, when he was the leader of the ummah, of the growing ummah, and he had wealth at his disposal, he took a stipend for food, right? Okay, for food, and it was such that after a couple of months, his wife had cooked some baked goods for him, like sweets for him. He was like, "Well, this is interesting. How did you get the money to get these baked goods?" She said, "Well, I saved up, a dinar, a coin here or there from our stipend, and after a couple months I was able to buy this." So at that point, he cut his stipend by that much dinar that she was saving. And you find these stories throughout, and I guess maybe the last story, and he was, so the people of wealth in the early Islamic system, the politicians of wealth in the early Islamic system, never hoarded their wealth. They always lived with the mentality that my wealth does not truly belong to me. Yes, I worked for it, but to consider it my own work as a just complete matter would be silly. And so they never operated on that assumption. So my end line message to you is don't be deluded into thinking that the Islamic political message has any sort of stronger push than saying help the poor. Right? We know that there are what you call hudud punishment, like early Islamic law. They had, for example, the cutting of hands for a thief. But when there was a famine, when economic conditions were low, that punishment would be suspended, because the first element of Islamic political thought is not, Islam will rule, get up the flag and cut hands. The first Islamic political element of thought is the poor have the first right in society for our assistance. And and then just maybe the end point I'll make is just to show you how silly it is that currently in America, Jesus as a political figure is considered to mean job creators and don't tax the rich. He said very famously in the Bible that it is harder for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven than for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle. Imagine for a moment a camel walking through the eye of a needle, right? So that my point, right? So Jesus was not down with the rich, so to speak. That was not his message, and that has. Oh, you meant 41, not 45.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay. So you guys get what I'm saying, I think, generally speaking. Thank you for your time and attention.
All right, next week we don't